Good morning, Brookside. We are so glad you're here with us on this beautiful, crisp homecoming weekend for BGSU. I don't know if you guys had a chance to participate in any of the festivities. I kind of hid out and took a weekend off, but there was so much happening around here. Looked like a lot of fun. But we are here this morning not to celebrate University Homecoming, but to celebrate the fact that we get to be a family united in Christ. And so if you guys can stand with me, let's go ahead and lift our hearts to Him in worship.
Christ is my firm foundation, the rock on which I stand when everything around me is shaken. I've never been more glad that I put my faith in Jesus, 'cause He's never let me down. He's faithful through generations, so why would He fail now?
He won't. I've still got joy in chaos. I've got peace that makes no sense, so I won't be going under. I'm not held by my own strength, 'cause I built my life on Jesus, and He's never let me down. He's faithful in every season. Spirit, we thank you that you are here, that you're present, that you uphold us, that you are the road on which we walk, the path on which we trod. Father, you are our direction, our sustainer, and that you are just wanting to walk this journey with us and give us the strength to find you when the road is not easy, when the days are long, that you just ask us to make room for you to walk with us.
Here is where I lay down every burden, every crown. This is my surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay it down, every lie and every doubt. This is my surrender. And I will make room for you to do whatever you want to do whatever you want to. And I will make room for you, yeah, to do whatever you want to do whatever you want to. Oh, this is where I lay it down, every burden, every crown. This is my surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay it down, every lie and every doubt. This is my surrender. And I will make room for you to do whatever you want to do whatever you want to. And I will make room for you, yeah, to do whatever you want to do whatever you want to. Oh, I will make room for you, yeah, yeah, to do whatever you want to do whatever you want to. Oh, I will make room for you, yeah, to do whatever you want to do whatever you want to. Shake up the ground of all my tradition, break down the walls of all my religion. Your way is better. Your way is better. Shake up the ground of all my tradition, break down the walls of all my religion. Your way is better. Your way is better. Shake up the ground of all my tradition, break down the walls of all my religion. Your way is better. Your way is better. Shake up the ground of all my tradition, break down the walls of all my religion. Your way is better. Your way is better. I will make room for you, yeah, yeah, to do whatever you want to do whatever you
might be a little weird to come into this place this morning and hear people talking about surrendering. Like, are we in a war? Are we in a battle? What does that word mean when we say this is my surrender? And for me, it means that there are things that I want to hold on to and control and try to manage my way without letting God into that story. And when I lay myself down and surrender myself, I make room for Him to do His work and His will, which is so much better than anything I could ever plan. But it takes a lot of trust. And how do we get to that kind of trust? I can only trust Him in these places that are hard and that are sacrificial and that are vulnerable, because I know that He gave Himself for me. He laid down His life first to save me, to give me a way out, to give me a better life. And because I trust His faithfulness in that huge, huge thing that He gave Himself for me, I can trust His faithfulness in all those tiny things that aren't tiny to me, but they're tiny to Him because He sees the whole picture. So we're going to sing an old hymn, Reborn. We haven't done it here for a while, so this may be new to a lot of you. It was new to most of the band today, but I hope that you will find beauty in the picture of the sacrifice that Christ made for us.
I hear the Savior say, my strength indeed is small. Child of weakness, watch and pray. Find in me thine all in all. Jesus paid it all. Oh, to Him I owe. Sin has left a crimson stain. He washed it white as snow. Lord, now indeed I find Thy power and Thine alone can change the leper's spots and melt the heart of snow. Jesus paid it all. Oh, to Him I owe. Sin has left a crimson stain. He washed it white as snow. And when before the throne I stand in Him complete, Jesus died my soul to save. My lips shall still repeat, Jesus paid it all. Oh, to Him I owe. Sin has left a crimson stain. He washed it white as snow. Sin has left a crimson stain. He washed it white as snow. He washed it white as snow. He washed it white as snow.
serve on the staff team here at Brookside Church, and we are planning so many fun and exciting things for you to partake in this upcoming year. One of my favorite is Impact Worship. This Friday at 7 p.m., right here in our very own city space, we are blessed to be led in worship by Michigan's own Anthony Stallion. My heart behind this worship night is that it would be an experience to worship and encounter God's presence outside of a Sunday morning. It would also be an opportunity for us to build and strengthen our relationship with both our college community and our community at large. So that means invite every single person you know, force them to be there. Kidding, no, don't invite them. Invite them. But we're just gonna be having fun on Friday night, worshiping God and soaking in His presence together. And I hope and pray that you're able to join us. See you.
Hey, what's going on, Brookside Church? My name is Anthony Stallion. If you guys are aware, perfect. If you're not aware, this upcoming Friday, the 23rd, we are having Impact Worship Night, and I'm excited to be a part of this with you guys, to minister to and alongside of you guys. It's going to be so God-filled. I know that the Holy Spirit is going to move in every individual's hearts that night, and I'm just super excited. If you're around the Bowling Green area, please come around and just worship, and let's gather together as the body of Christ, and prayerfully that we are equipped that night to continue to spread the goodness of Jesus throughout the world and throughout our cities and individual locations. So I'll see you guys Friday. Let's come prepared to worship.
All right. Okay. That is Tony's sense of humor. He'll borrow your car and he'll be like, "Oh, I got in an accident, man." I'm just kidding. Like, it's like, ha. All right. I am really excited about that, by the way. Like when we first talked about the city space all those years ago, and before, for those of you who, we meet here on campus on Sundays, and then we had like a little office. It was actually downtown over Finders Records, and it was great for having like little meetings, but we couldn't do anything unless we were borrowing someone else's church or meeting in someone's houses, and so the rest of the week, when the city space became open to us, when the opportunity arose, instead of having just a bunch of little offices, what about a big space? It was a church building, and you just saw it. We rehabbed it, and I dreamed, of course, things like college groups being able to meet there, and small groups for Brookside, but dreamed of ways that we could like worship together and do worship nights like that. All of those things were in my mind. So when those things come to fruition, I hope you get a chance to be a part of it and really because Sunday morning, Rob always loves to say this when he's leading worship, where he'll say, I know it's weird to come out at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning and start singing as loud as you can, but it's not weird on a Friday night. By the time you get to Friday night, your lungs are ready to do the job. So I'd love to have you guys be a part of it. It's really exciting. So, well, without further ado, I want to jump in here. And I want to tell you a little of our story. So Jesus was crucified and resurrected somewhere around the year 33 AD. There's all sorts of theories that range anywhere from 30 to 33. If you would love to have a fun discussion about such things, I would love to have that with you. But if I did it now, you'd start falling asleep on me. So nonetheless, we began to grow. And at first, we were just assumed to be a part of the Jewish thing, and the Romans left us alone. But very quickly, the Romans realized, well, they're not really Jewish. And the demand was that we would worship. The Romans held together the Roman Empire by basically being like, you worship your gods, you worship your gods, you worship yours, but everyone's going to worship Caesar as the Son of God. So you'd go once a year and you'd put on your incense and say Caesar is Lord, and they would check you off. All right, you're loyal to the empire. Well, the Christians would not say Caesar is Lord, because we like to say the other one. Jesus is Lord, right? And so we began to be martyred. And for the first 300 years, it was very difficult to be a Christian. Sometimes they'd leave us alone, sometimes intense persecutions, but right around the year 300, under Emperor Diocletian. Yeah, Diocletian. You don't name your kids that anymore? Okay, well, nonetheless, there he is, and he, empire-wide, began a persecution. And as his reign came to an end, as usual, the Roman Empire just begins to go into chaos, and there's a fight over who's the emperor. And one of the guys who's trying to become emperor comes to the river Tiber, ready to take Rome, ready to crown himself emperor, and his name is Constantine. And in the year 312, he stood by the river Tiber, getting ready to fight for Rome. And he, according to his words, he had a vision. He had a vision in the sky that said if he put this sign on his shields, it's the X with like the P coming up version of the cross, which the X is the CH sound, and the P in Greek is actually an R. It's the first two letters of Christos and Christ, and it's called the cross of Constantine. If he would put this on his shields, he would conquer, and he did, and he became emperor. And in the year 313, for the first time since the crucifixion of Jesus, it was finally legal in the empire to become a Christian, to be one. Now, some people say that Constantine made Christianity the religion of the empire. That is not true. That didn't happen until like 395 AD. But back in Constantine's day, the Christians were filled with hope, because here's the deal. Before Constantine became a Christian, Christianity was spreading like wildfire. Not only had it gone all the way across Europe and all the way across the Roman Empire, but it had gone down deep into Africa, all the way across North Africa, but that's still Roman Empire, but no, down further, down past modern-day Sudan, all the way into modern-day Ethiopia that we know for sure, and we're pretty sure it had made it as far as Kenya. Spreading. And into the east, far beyond the Roman Empire again, we're talking by the year 300, we know that Christianity had made it as far as China. Spreading. But the emperor becomes a Christian. Now we're really going to win was the belief. Surely if we have power, surely if we take over, we're going to be able to run this thing. And as I said, in I think the year is 395, Theodosius made religion the original religion of the empire. Now it's illegal not to be a Christian. That should make you uncomfortable. In the year 450, something really strange happened. There was a debate over how to properly let people know that Jesus is fully God and fully man. Do we say it the way we learn to say it in the West? As I just said it, Jesus is fully God and fully man. And in the Latin syntax, that sounded great. But in the Eastern syntax, that way of saying things sounded like multiple personality disorder. The way it passed into languages like the Egyptian Coptic or the Syriac and further languages, and they pushed back and said no. But the way they said it to the Latin world sounded a little like you were saying Jesus isn't really God, nor is he really man. He's some weird mix of the two. And they had a debate about it. And the Council of Chalcedon in 451, it was decided that the proper way to say it is Jesus is fully God and fully man. Well, the Christians in the East went, I'm out. If you were beyond the Roman Empire, that sounded like you were just making a quadrinity now. That's actually the way they said it. Instead of a trinity, now we've got this weird. They were like, we're out. So they just kind of like, and if you learn church history, if you've ever taken part of it, because we learn it usually from that European perspective, because churches like ours sort of come from churches that came from churches, right? That came from all that. They just sort of disappear to history. You can learn about them. They're amazing. These Christians, the way that they lived under the terrors of Islam across the centuries and still exist to this day. Down in Egypt, the same. There's this story, though, because the Egyptian bishop wouldn't buy into this formula, so the emperor decides to send a new bishop named Cyrus. Bishop, that's a Christian leader. That guy's going to probably be able to solve this. He's going to have a good Christian heart. Cyrus shows up, can't find the bishop. His name was Benjamin, the bishop Benjamin. But he does find Benjamin's brother, Menes. And he takes Menes is probably, he takes him, and they burn him alive to get him to repent. He won't. So then they pulled out all his teeth, and then he wouldn't. And then they put him in a sandbag and took him out into the ocean and said, you are either going to repent and say it the Latin way, or we're going to kill you because you won't say Jesus fully God and fully man the way we like it. And they drowned him. What happened to our faith? What happened to the faith of the martyrs, these people who stood carefully for Jesus, who walked it out, even though the Romans were killing them, and the way of Jesus had spread far and wide, as far as Ethiopia and as far as China and as far as Spain and even England? What happened? And the answer is easy. We got power. We got power. Same thing happens here, by the way. If you know American history, you know that there have been 3 key times where the church has flexed its muscles and said, we're going to get our way in ruling America, and we get some really weird mixed results from it. I know that there's a lot of, hubbub around, the church's role in recent Supreme Court decisions and everything like that, but I'm talking big taters, and here's the 3. Number 1, around the turn of the 19th century, going into the 1800s, abolitionism did exist. It did exist, but it always existed in this format. While slavery looks evil, and this is the language that has been used, we need to send them to Africa. That was all that existed. But what happened was, as the Great Awakening hit, the Second Great Awakening specifically, and the rise of these people really repenting, and some churches were looking and saying, why aren't we worshiping of them? Why are we not one with the people? And there was all these movements, and they were mostly in the north. They were not existing in the south. Duh. But nonetheless, and these say things like, wow, I think slavery is bad, but I've literally never met a person of color. They would have used whatever was the correct term in those days. And I've never met a person of color who wants to go to Africa. They were born here. They live here. This is their country. This ought to be our country. That language began to exist in the 1800s. And that kind of abolitionism is the kind that Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman exercised their Christianity through. And it was the rise of the Second Great Awakening Christians that demanded something happen, caused the Civil War. And we could discuss from the political perspective what happened. The second time, because you see the Great Awakening Christians are like, yes, it is our job to continue to challenge government and do something about it. Do you know what real social evil we need to deal with next? It was actually prostitution. This isn't the one, though. With prostitution was the sense that, and they were really gracious about it, because it wasn't like we need to deal with those filthy women. No, it was not that. It was the realization is they were ministering to women who were caught in this lifestyle. They were like, I've never met one who wants to stay here. They are trapped by a system that's keeping them there. They were thinking systemically, and they moved and had radical success in dealing with those sorts of things, so then we could really deal with the real ill that's causing all the problems in America. And in the early 1900s, we finally fixed it. It was the problem behind all the problems, and if we solve this problem, we'll get it. It's alcohol. They rallied up America and got a constitutional amendment. Do you know what it takes to get a constitutional amendment? It takes 3/4 of the country voting on this thing, getting all those states involved. What it takes to get people to look and say, yes, we're going to solve alcohol, that's the kind of sway that Christianity had in the early 1900s. And there were sermons from Billy Sunday about how a new reign of righteousness is going to come on America. Either that or, organized crime. And we learned hard lessons about flexing our muscles. But then, in one of the most profound versions of the church, creating a church movement in the way of Jesus and changing the world happened as we came into the 1960s. Those from the outside wanted to call it a political movement, but those who were part of it did not. They knew exactly what they are, because the black churches of America and a small group of white churches who were willing to affiliate with them said, this is sin, what is happening, and we're going to bring to conscience the way of what is happening, and that's civil rights, by using the methods of Jesus, by picking up our cross and following him. And once again, you can judge how the church, being the church, did its movement. Today, so as we've been in the middle of a series, we're looking at Micah 6:8. You can throw it up there if you'd like. We've been talking about what does it look like for us to live this way that's asked of us. So here is, he has told you, oh man, what is good, what does the Lord require you? He wants you to do justly, to love kindness, to love loving kindness, to love mercy, to love compassion. That's one of those Hebrew words that it's hard. By the way, there's a translation of the Bible called the Amplified Version. It's unbearable to read, but here's why. Every time it comes to a power word that we don't have a good English translation for, it'll put a big, huge definition. So if you get Micah 6:8 in the Amplified, it'll be like, but to love loving kindness, goodness, justice, mercy, compassion, just being an all-around loving of other people person kind of a thing. It's like, I can't read this. Okay, and then to walk humbly with God this way. So 2 weeks ago, we began talking about living it in your life. What does it mean to be a person who lives this way? And traditionally in the churches that came from the Great Awakening, we have tended to think of morality in terms of personal morality. How do I live as a person? Last week we talked about us as a group. The vast majority of the New Testament is aimed at helping the Christians be the church together. And one of the deceiving things that happens in modern English, see, these are the translational problems, is that we rarely know whether the word you is plural or singular based on, because we dropped. Do you know in Old English, you can like ye and thee and thou and thine and all that sort of stuff, and we're like, oh, those are old words, but they literally separated singular you from plural you. So now we have to like come up with weird words to plural you, like yins. Any Pittsburgh people? We're not yawing here. We're not doing that one here. But I'll let the Pittsburgh people have their way for a minute. Yins. All right. Most of the New Testament is yins, not you. We're a we. And we talked about that last week, what it means for the church to be the church. And it was a very challenging sermon because it's what most of the New Testament is about. It is a high challenge that we be the church. But today, I want to begin to explore, what does it mean for us to live it out? As we go beyond this room, out into, the lobby of Ol's Camp and then beyond, what does it look like for us? This has challenged the church greatly in recent years. And it has caused divisions and hurts. And so as we go in through today, the way I want to approach it, now, one of the difficulties is the New Testament, and if you think about it, these early apostles are helping these communities form. The vast majority of it's aimed at helping us be one anothering together. Very little. So I have an example. So the book of Colossians, a huge section on the power of Jesus, and then a huge section on us living out his resurrection life, and it's how we love one another, everything. And then usually there'll be, but what about how we live it out into the world? And it'll be a short one-liner like this here, where this is it. This is the whole Colossians. How do we live it outwardly? Walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. Now, on one hand, that's incredibly thin. It doesn't tell us what to do if Caesar converts to Christ. It doesn't tell us what to do exactly with our vote. Because you live in a land where you're like 0.000000015% Caesar. You have a vote, a government of the people, by the people. You have some sort of control over it. Now, on one hand, I want to be really honest. Please stop overinflating what your vote can do. 130 million some people voted in the last election. Do you know how small one vote is out of 130 million? There might be other ways more important. But nonetheless, your vote still is important. I don't want to tell you it's not. I highly believe in voting. I like this sort of thing. But I want us to recognize that we're being given some power, and we have this sense, great, what do I take with my faith? Should I aim it at abortion? Should I aim it at civil rights? Should I aim it, what do I do with it? And when we come to these things, it gets very difficult and gets a little scary. And today I have just 3 perspectives, but before we move from this verse, I want you to catch. Do you see Micah 6:8 embedded in it? Do you see that he's asking us to go? Because this thing's gonna go out, and how we engage the outsiders, it matters. It matters that we're thinking Christ-like as we go out, but notice that it wants us to continue to be like Christ as we do it. The emphasis on being gracious, seasoned with salt, but also being wise to know how to answer. The walking with God, mercifully loving people, and living out the way of justice is buried in just this simple verse. Do you see how the way begins to pour out? So today is a little different. In many ways, because this has been 3 sermons, today, the ordinary way that we would preach at Brookside is we'd spend a lot of time looking at the scripture, and then we would draw application. But because we've spent so much time looking at this over the last couple weeks, I want this is almost like part 3 of the sermon as we begin to draw this out toward application. And so if you're new to Brookside and you're thinking, how much, like they just like threw a verse or 2 up, that's not my normal way. As a preacher, I just love for you to get to see the scripture and to walk through it. For the most part, I just want you to understand what the apostles wrote. Because I think the more you see that, the more you'll be able to respond. But we do want to draw toward application. And so if you'll allow me today to begin to apply this out with some thoughts. what do we do with the power God has given us as we move out? Just 3 perspectives today. Perspective number 1. It's really helpful to place us in history with a lens. And so I have this. The church is Israel. Our countries are not. Okay, let me explain what I mean. You're reading through the Old Testament, and you come to a verse like, let's say, 2 Chronicles chapter 7, and he says, and God's promising, the people may rebel, but if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and will pray, I will come and I will hear from heaven and I will heal their land. When we hear a verse like that, we have to actually decide, okay, what do I do with that now? Is he saying that if the Jewish people will do that, finally God will heal Israel? Because that's who he was talking to. Or do I begin to apply it to us in some way? And if so, how? So let's think. We've got Israel. Israel's a country in this time period, exactly where Israel is today. Its borders shape and grow, but Jerusalem's still Jerusalem. And you've got a king, from the line of David. You've got the sons of David who are the kings, and you've got some priests. And Israel, most of the Old Testament prophets are aimed, just like the New Testament is aimed at the church, most of the Old Testament prophets are aiming at Israel. And they are asking them to be under the law. Are you obeying the law that you covenanted with God? And they're judged based on whether or not they're obeying the law. But occasionally the prophets will turn their eyes out at the other kingdoms. Babylon, Edom, Egypt, whichever direction you're going. And I pointed in the correct directions, but I don't know if you felt that. You met people. That was good stuff. Okay, anyway, so when the judgment goes out at them, God is not judging them for whether or not they're obeying the law of Moses. They haven't covenanted to the law of Moses, and they are not held under it. The emperor of Babylon, or the king of Babylon, is never held accountable for whether or not he obeyed the 4th commandment. Well, I don't know which one that is. But he is asked, did you rule justly? Did you look after the poor? And then how did you treat God's people? So there is judgment for the other nations. It's just different because it's not God's law. So when we hear those verses, we have to translate them into us. Now, the theologically astute, there's some people here who are going to be like, okay, well, are the Jews still Israel? There are questions about how the modern Jews fit into Israel. That's not where we have time to go today. And so if you like that for most of you, like, what is he talking about? I don't know. But some people will, and I just want you to know that's a chapter and verse of this theology that we're going to set aside for right now because I want us to ask about us. You see, there is a nation who are God's people. The nation is the followers of Christ. So when we hear the verse, if my people who are called by my name, who are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray, I will heal their land. He's not talking to America. He's talking to his nation, the church. You see how that works? And then, therefore, the king then, when we read all those king passages and God's challenges to the king, well, there is a king, and he lives up to them. There is a king who is King Jesus. He's in charge. And so when we read those things, we have to see Jesus king and us as the followers and us as the nation that wants to be the repentant ones. By way of analogy, there's a huge debate right now about how we should present history to our kids. And we're not going to go deep into that. But one of the reasons that debate exists is because the feeling is if we don't give our kids a glorious sense of our story, they won't have a glorious sense of us and they won't want to be us. It's hiding in the mix. And some people are like, if we don't give a bad enough version of ourselves, then we'll continue to not fix the bad. And that's why that fight's happening. But that same impulse can happen to us as Christians. We can start to want the church glory story. The church glory story is awesome, both big and small. So when I talked about the church, I talked about the failure of the emperors and what happened. But the church has changed the world. The Christians from as far away as Ethiopia and China and England and everything that everywhere they have gone, they have changed how people think. We changed how people saw children. We changed how people saw kindness. We invented charity and hospitals and philosophy, and science comes out of a Christian worldview. There is so much that has come from the broader world of Christians that have gone out into this world. We have done so much. And if we want to, we could just tell our glory stories all day long. And what will subtly start to happen is we'll start to say, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. We are the superior ones, they are the not, well, us and them. You see that sense that we need a glorious story to feel good about ourselves? Brookside can do the same. Brookside has amazing ways that it has gone out. I mean, the list is, I don't even like, there are men and women who have cared for the poor and for the outcast and for the special needs, who have actually used their life, who have social workers who have gone out and said, I'm going to use my way of being out into the world. And we've even begun to, in recent years, really try to say, how do we deal with the problem of this segregated church? We want to go after these things. We care. We can tell a glory story and we can feel good about it. And if we're not careful, we can even start to go, oh yeah, we're the church who's doing it right. Those other churches are all foul, broken. They're the wrong ones. You see that need for a glory story? But it's not Christianity. Christianity's story says this: for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Once we were dead in our trespasses and sin, but God, who's rich in mercy, rescued us. But God, who loves us, redeemed us. And then it finishes and says, for by grace, the loving kindness of God, you are saved, not through works. You're not going to do anything. It is a gift of God so that no one can brag. The church can't brag. The worldwide church can't brag. Brookside Church can't brag. You can't brag. None of us can. We don't need a glory story. We need Jesus King. We need Jesus King. If we start that way, we'll know what to do with the second perspective. Live kingdom culture. Celebrate regional cultures. Let's talk about what a culture is for a moment, because that word gets thrown around a lot, and you need a way to operationalize it to help yourself think. But every group of people needs a common set of sort of rules and ways of being that will help them live together well. Now, some of those things will be objective. Seriously, don't kill each other. Right? Yeah, murder bad. Yeah. Every culture that wants to be well will know that the murder is the bad one, right? Some of them, by the way, are utterly arbitrary on the other end, and yet important. Do you know how arbitrary it is that we decided to drive on the right-hand road instead of the left? And some cultures do the other one. Now, what's really crazy, if you drive down the wrong side of the road here in Ohio, we'll regard you as evil. And no amount of saying, well, I did it in England and they liked it, will help, right? And yet it's arbitrary. That can get weird. But in order to know how to begin to sort that out, what we can start to do is, whatever's comfortable, what's normal around me, I'll declare all of that normative for everybody, and anyone who violates that culture is therefore the wrong. And that's just kind of how humans tend to work. Honestly, if I told you I was driving on the freeway, have you ever done this? Have you ever been in a situation where you're driving on the freeway and someone's coming at you? Probably somebody who's intoxicated in some way. It's terrifying, right? I have been in that situation. But free advice, get over to the right-hand side because they're thinking they're on a 2-lane road. Don't go on there, so get on the other. That's what you do. And that's what we did. Over. Then you call the cops. Freebie for you there. My point here is this. With culture, as Christians, we are the ones called to the way of Jesus that doesn't know Jew, nor Greek, nor male, nor female, nor slave, nor Scythian, nor anything. We are not the ones who say, we're going to do this culture church there and that. We are the ones who want to be one, who wanted to be able to do it. And if the way of Jesus was going to be able to go out, what we do is we center Christ culture. Sermon on the Mount stuff, taking up your cross, following him, the way of love, the way of forgiveness, the way of laying down our lives, the way of instead of exalting self, exalting Christ so that others can be exalted. That way we do it everywhere. And then, because we have the culture of Jesus to rally around, we can celebrate cultures that aren't the same as ours. We can. We can look and go, so when I was in Guadalajara, everything started a half hour late or more. Probably not surprising to you, right? There are certain cultures that don't value time the way that we do. American culture really, really thinks about time. I'm irritated when you show up at 10:15. We started at 10. Where were you? How dare you be late? You are violating my deeply held American sense of cultural time. Right? In Mexico, I actually had to learn to recognize no one's going to care. They are not going to care how much I care about time because they're working from their. But we can actually begin to recognize that other cultures' rules don't work the same way as ours, and that they have a way that they work in, and we can begin to celebrate one another. It's what must happen if we're going to stop having American churches segregated, because the reason we tend to segregate is not just based on color, but it's actually become based on anything that makes me feel uncomfortable. I'd prefer to go to the 40-year-olds church where all of the kids have teenagers, because I have teenagers. Also, I want each of the teenagers to be into soccer and not football, because the football players don't really meet me very well. And also, I want it to be, if you could manicure it just perfectly so everyone's just like me, I'll feel really okay. It's Antichrist. And instead of going, can I see you? Can I see you? Can I find your culture? Because we have the common culture of Christ, we can celebrate other cultures. So what does that look like? A couple ways that I've seen it as we go out. I would love for you to preference the Christian way over Christian values. Hear me out. When you listen to the broader political discussion, you will often hear the words Christian values put out there. That somehow we're protecting it. Even sometimes Christian iconography or symbols. I wanted to put up a verse in my office, but they wouldn't let me, kind of things, right? These external manifestations of our faith that we want to be able to hold them because they feel important to us. And, I'd like to be able to wear a cross. I know in France you can't wear a cross because they don't want any religious symbols because of the things that France fights through. And so what are we going to have here? But we stop being Christian when we go, so then I'm just going to fight. And I'm going to use my anger and my rage, and I'm going to flex my muscle, and that's how Caesar did it. He was so engaged with making sure you were correctly Christian that he was willing to have a person burnt alive, teeth ripped out, and put in a sandbag and drowned. You see how protecting the iconography caused the most antichrist thing to happen? Be so careful, because, if they want you to take down your verses in your office at work, I'd like for you to find ways to say, hey, maybe that's not cool. I get it. And yet, when we exalt the exterior over the way of being, incredible injustice can happen. Listen, brothers and sisters, we live in a country where we look back in the past and say, how? How could Christians who proclaimed to be following God, who came to church, sang the songs loudly, did all the external things, how could they own people and beat them within the inches of their lives and treat them with the kind of cruelty that they did? The answer is external Christianity without necessitating the way. That's how it happened, and it's how it'll happen today. Living kingdom culture, celebrating regional culture. And I mean that because as a church, we've really dedicated ourselves to saying, how can we reach across the racial divide that was handed to us? And the answer is not going to be that we all have the same culture. Men and women are going to come with some very different cultures to our church. And if we're like, that's strange to me, I will draw back, we'll miss it. But rather, we have the way of Jesus. Tell me more about how you approach things, because I'd love to hear it. It could be amazing. What do we do, though, when it comes time to press for justice into our world? This is the third perspective. There are, I wrote here, a change is a candle burnt from both ends. The church ought to be a prophetic voice into our world. The church ought to, as a people, be able to say to the world, hey, that is against it's unjust, and it is causing incredible pain and hurt, and it needs to be solved. Whether those issues come in terms of words racial injustice and the poor who God cares about, or on the right we have things like abortion and the treatment of the unborn and the way children are treated and all of these sorts of things, and as they all come together and we can, as we stretch out to be change agents into the world, we have to recognize it's a candle burnt from both ends. But let's begin, Micah 6:8. So the first thing we want to remember is, if that way does not include doing justly, that's what we're aiming at, loving, merciful, loving kindness and compassion, and walking with God, it will always be tyranny. So I come back to what happened to Menaeus, Benjamin's brother, at the hands of Cyrus the bishop, at the hands of, I've forgotten what emperor, because I don't care, some Byzantine emperor. What happened? How did that happen? Well, the answer is simple. They thought they could achieve the justice they thought was just with ways that were anti-Christ. And it couldn't be more obvious. That's why I picked it. We must, Micah 6:8, at every single turn if we're going to do what needs to be done. So when we look at something that needs to be changed. So candle birth both ends. On one end is hearts and minds. If we're going to change our world, and we do not think that we're going to go after hearts and minds, what will end up happening is we'll go to the other end of the candle, which is just legal structures and power. So I'm going to speak bluntly and without putting a lot of opinions into things, but I'll just tell you the facts. A big, huge Supreme Court decision hit this year that people have politically worked for since Ronald Reagan. Exulting in the streets, yay, we finally won. Do you know what we won? For people who really care about the horrors of abortion, pretty much nothing. The fact is, all that really happened is states are allowed to make their own laws, and a few states have made laws, but the fact is, those states were barely doing abortions at all. Kentucky had one abortion clinic before the recent Supreme Court decision, and now it has none. And states like California or New York or other places where abortion's incredibly common, it stayed the same. You see what happens when we win a political victory that has no real change of hearts and minds behind it? It's hollow. There was a recent Supreme Court decision that worked the other way, and it wasn't one that churches always wanted, but the Obergefell decision, which changed gay marriage in America, but it didn't really. America's hearts and minds had already swung around, and so that is a picture of somebody who said hearts and minds and legal structures, if they can be brought together, real change will happen. Whether you're excited about it or not, they burnt the candle at both ends. That's how it works. If we see a change we want, hearts and minds must happen, okay? So this is going to involve things like, how do we live out into our world? So if you are attempting to change hearts and minds, and you're not thinking about using the way of Jesus, do you really think it'll work? Do we think that if we're going to go into our world and mock people and shame people and call them political names? And think about the amount of political name calling that happens around us. Some light ones are like rhinos and dinos, or Republican name only, or whatever. If we don't actually see people anymore. We just put labels, and some of the labels become really pejorative. And I'm not interested in reciting them from the stage. My point is, do you think you're going to win? Do you think you can win one where relationship and love has not happened because Jesus would just be like, okay, well, are you ready for my way? But a flip side has become true. And that is that quite often we've called it politics. So politics is like anything that involves governmental structure. We shouldn't be talking about it. But the fact is, there are things that are evil and we should be talking about them. But how do we engage legal structures together? Because we do want the law to change. So civil rights is an example of going after the hearts and minds. Seeing, I think his name's Walter Graves, getting bit by a police dog on the front of the papers. It caused people to be ashamed and to say, I have to change, or I've been ignoring this thing and now I can't. And yet it also involved things like passage of real laws. And as we talk about these things, we want to be careful. Because right now, the mood of our nation is all or nothingism on political structures. But here's the thing. Joseph Biden, Donald Trump, Barack Obama, George Bush, Clinton, Bush, Reagan, Carter, none of them are king. None of them are king. None of them have the power of the king. And when our hearts flutter to the biggest degree when we think about the election, it is not because it's really that important. It is rather because we've believed that the way of Jesus doesn't really work. And these are the only ones who have the power to really do the thing. And we begin to say, Jesus Lord, but Biden King. Jesus Lord, but I recited, whatever president, he's our current one. We begin, and then we start to come to the presidential elections and do things like, this is the most important presidential election of our time. Actually, there was a very, very noteworthy Christian leader who in the last election put out a tweet that read something to the effect of, if the election doesn't go, fill in the blank way that he wanted to go, you can guess, then I don't know how Christianity will last in America. Really? Oh, man. Do you know how that sounds? That makes it sound like, 300-400 years ago, Jesus didn't know what he was going to do in the world. And finally, us Americans showed up so that we could save him. Oh, thank goodness I finally have an American to save me, Jesus says. And by the way, I love my country. I don't mean to down it. I'm one of us. I want us to be great. I don't mean anything like that. What I really want to say is he's going to be fine if we disappear. Now, I don't want us to disappear. So Abraham Lincoln, and we put the Peter verse up, we can end. Band, come up. Abraham Lincoln was once asked during the Civil War. Someone said something like, I hope God's on our side. And Abraham Lincoln's response was, oh man. He probably didn't say, oh man, I said that. I hope we're on God's side. I hope we're on God's side. You see the picture, and I don't know enough about Abraham Lincoln to know his faith structures or anything, but that heart of faith that says Jesus King, Jesus' way, Jesus Lord, following him, has the courage to go out. It's not the kind of faith that says we'll hide in our rooms and do our Sunday morning rooms and do our Christian thing and then go out into the world and live like the world. It's one that says no matter where I go, his way must go with me, and I will follow it out to the ends, and I will with compassion and love and the Christ way serve. And if that means I get set aside, I'll trust Jesus with it. If that means I get marginalized, if I don't get my way, I'll trust Jesus with it. Peter said this. Now, who's there to harm you if you're zealous for what's good? If you're a good person, who's going to want to harm you? But he does recognize, well, even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you'll be blessed implicitly by God. This is where his book had been going. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts honor Christ as Lord, as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hopes in you, but do it with gentleness and respect. Honor Christ as Lord means walk humbly with him. Be more interested in obeying him than protecting him. Be more interested in living his way than in protecting the right of others to follow his way. Be more interested in his way than protecting whatever bastion it is that we think that he needs. Because if it requires us leaving his way, being just, loving, merciful, loving kindness, and walking with him, it's not protecting him anymore, it's fighting him. Never again allow yourself to think you're on Jesus' side when you're fighting against him.
Go ahead and stand up with us today.
Misunderstandings, hate running rampant, every man out on his own. It seems like we've lost our way, and the distance grows every day. Thought that we had it, caught in the madness, oh ain't it tragic, but you say, if we turn from our wicked ways, humble ourselves and pray, seek your face, you give us grace. Come have your way, Lord. Here we are, bending hearts, bending knees, outstretched arms. God, hear us from heaven. Send us your presence. We need you, Lord. We need you, Lord. the rising sun. My faith is rising up. You're the God of your promise. What you have started, you're faithful to finish. But you said, if we turn from our wicked ways, humble ourselves and pray, seek your face, you give us grace. So come have your way, Lord. Here we are, abandoned hearts, abandoned knees with outstretched arms. God, hear us from heaven, send us your presence. We need you, Lord. We need you, Lord. Here we are, abandoned hearts, abandoned knees with outstretched arms. God, hear us from heaven, send us your presence. We need you, Lord. Come and heal our land. Oh Lord, come and heal our land. Oh Lord, come and heal our land. Oh Lord, come and heal our land.
Oh Lord, come and heal us.
Oh Lord, come and heal our land. 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 Here we are, abandoned hearts, abandoned knees with outstretched arms. God, hear us from heaven, send us your presence. We need you, Lord. We need you, Lord. Here we are, abandoned hearts, abandoned knees with outstretched arms. God, hear us from heaven, send us your presence. We need you, Lord. Need you, Lord. We need you, Lord. Come and move. We say yes to you. Come and move. We say yes to you. Come and move. We say yes to you. Come and move. We say yes to you.
Come, Lord Jesus.
Come and move. We say yes to you. 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 We say yes to you. Jesus, we say yes to you. We say yes to you. Come and move. We say yes to you.
In the book of James, Jesus' younger half-brother James is writing to the church and talking about the way they treat the poor and the poor man. And he's concerned that like the rich man gets a good seat and the bad man, or the poor man, is shoved aside. And he says this funny thing. He says, you know, if you break one law, you've broken the law. You know, it doesn't do any good to come to the court and accused of stealing and say, look, well, I've never broken the law about murder, and I've never broken the law. Like, break the law, you're a lawbreaker. And that's kind of his point there in 2. But the thing that caused him to say it was, we have all these places where we can say we've done righteously. But in this case, if we've overlooked the marginalized that Jesus just went to, if we overlook the broken ones that Jesus went to, if we overlook them, if we shove them aside because they're not comfortable to us, there are people who have been marginalized in our land. It's just real. And you and I didn't probably do it. Like, how often have you heard people be like, I didn't enslave anybody. Why am I held responsible? You're not guilty. This isn't somehow like, well, somebody did it, so we're going to hold you. It's not like that. It's like this. Because of the sins that came before us, there are marginalized and broken ones and hurting ones. And we follow our Lord Jesus into those places because that's the spot that made him say, if your version of justice can list A, B, C, D, and E, but doesn't involve looking to the marginalized, it's not it. So here's what I'd love to challenge you to do this week. If you take me up on a challenge, read through the Gospel of Luke. Just follow along with Jesus through Luke. But pay attention to the word poor. You will be shocked because the other Gospels don't quite do the same thing that Luke does with it. Read through the Gospel of Luke and look at the word poor and see if God is not calling you up to a kind of justice that follows Jesus in ways that you've never dreamed. Take me up on it. It'll be amazing. Father, thank you for Brookside Church. Thank you for the amazing amount of justice that has gone out from these people, the amount of Christ-likeness, the amount of care, the amount of wanting to see well-being, the ways that we've engaged places and structures and people. Father, I'm really grateful for what you've done. But Father, there's so much you can do through us. There's so much more for the making of the kingdom. And Father, you've placed dreams on our heart. Father, I ask that you would fill us with your Spirit and that you would take us out into those places and that we would, in so much as we've started, that we would go further, farther, better, more into seeing your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Thank you for my brothers and sisters. I love them so much, and I'm so thankful to be a part of these just Christians, just your followers, just people who love you. Father, do great things through us. In your name, amen. Have a great week. Thanks for being a part of this series with me. I hope it challenged you. Next week, Brad is up, and then we'll have other things after that. See you guys.